Toyota has always been the king of hybrids. They pioneered the technology. They were the first company to mass produce hybrids successfully. And at the time, everybody was laughing. But today, that hybrids are becoming more mainstream. All the other companies are trying to catch up, like Hyundai. In today's video, we're going to take a look at Toyota's fourth generation hybrid system versus Hyundai's hybrid system. And more importantly, which one should you buy, or should you consider other alternatives to the kings of hybrids? Let's get started. Let's start with the overall design. See, Toyota hybrids design have not really changed since its inception, believe it or not. It just got improved, and that goes with Toyota's ethos of continuous improvement. They just don't throw things out if they work, they just keep making them better. So the basic operating principle of a Toyota hybrid, there's two electric motors, there's a gasoline engine. Two electric motors, one of them drives the car and charges, the other one, a smaller one, charges the battery, creates a reduction in the planetary gear set inside the transmission, or starts the engine. In Hyundai hybrids, even though in their textbook they say there is two electric motors, there's actually one electric motor sandwiched between the engine and the transmission. The second electric motor is actually not an electric motor per se, because it does not drive the car, it does not generate to recharge the battery, the hybrid battery. So in my book, it doesn't really qualify. So it actually has one electric motor, which is not a bad thing, it's just different design. Let's talk about the engine choices for hybrid systems in these cars, and this is where the comparison will start. Toyota has always used decent-sized engines for their hybrids. At some point, they had V6s for their hybrids. That's slowly going away. But in their normal-sized car, like this 2022 Camry right here, you have a 2.5-liter engine. Basically, the same size engine that would go in this car if it did not have the hybrid system. And that is an interesting thing, because it makes these cars not severely underpowered or severely relying on the electric motors. But in Hyundai's world, we have a, for lack of a better word, a sample of an engine. This is a very, very small engine for this enormous SUV, and it is turbocharged. So it has the lag, and it's very small. And yes, it does have the help of the hybrid system, but it only has the help of one motor, not really two. So that's not very ideal. But what's even more not ideal is this. In Toyota hybrids, there is an entire super powerful electric motor that is basically operated off of the hybrid battery that starts the engine. So engine starts are basically from 0 to idle in a millisecond. That's how they start. In the Hyundai, however, they decided to go a different route. And while I admire them not just copying Toyota's design, just changing a few configurations, they went the long route to not copy Toyota, and I think they kind of got carried away. So here's how Hyundai hybrid system starts. Because you only have one technically electric motor, you can't have that motor start the engine per se, because what's going to be driving the car? So here's what happens to start this engine in hybrids, in Hyundai hybrids. There is a second motor, even though it's not a real motor in my book. It's called the HSG, Hybrid Starter Generator. In English, that is an alternator, a very fancy alternator. So what this alternator does, if you apply power to it, it's going to spin. If you spin it, it's going to generate. That's very simple operating principle of every motor. However, here we are using the alternator to start the engine. Now, many of you will think this is gear driven, which would have been fine. There's two gears that are meshed together. You know, they're always connected and life's good. But that's not the case. It's actually belt driven. So essentially, this hybrid system starts this engine using the drive belt. That is not the greatest idea in the planet. And to do that, there's a giant belt, which is a very heavy duty belt, and a very over elaborate and over engineered tensioner to keep tension on that belt as it starts possibly the biggest load in this car, which is the engine. Not the smoothest operation. And in real life operation, it's just not smooth. You feel it. It's not very quick, super slow actually. While in Toyota land, we don't even have a starter and alternator, so I'm thinking this point goes to Then let's talk about the transmissions, because hybrids also have transmissions. In the Toyota hybrids, there's an eCVT. Every time you hear the word CVT, your heart skips a beat and you automatically turn away and run in the other direction. But that's not the case. These eCVTs are completely different than any CVT transmission. But in Hyundai, we have a proper 6-speed transmission. No DCT, no dual clutch complication, brake every 10,000 miles. No, just an honest-to-God 6-speed transmission. While Toyota's hybrid transmission seems extremely complicated, it actually is not. And there is no CVT about it. You have the 2 electric motors we talked about, you have a planetary gear set that distributes the power, and a bunch of gears and a differential. That's it. There is not even a clutch, there is nothing. So while this transmission is extremely expensive because it is unique to hybrids, the motors are very expensive and they're not really serviceable separate. That's the only drawback of the CVT. But from a drivability standpoint, the eCVT tends to have that CVT tendency. You accelerate when the engine comes on, it just screams and screams and can get annoying. In this, however, once you get the engine going, and we'll talk about that in a bit, once you get the engine going, this transmission is beautiful. It shifts beautifully. Very smooth shifts, feels like a normal car. You almost forget you're driving a hybrid, which is a huge plus. So as much as I love eCVT transmissions from Toyota and how reliable they are, but in the real world, when you're driving them, I'm guessing this one wins. What about models with all-wheel drive? Well, in Toyota land, it cannot be simpler. They simply add another motor, another MG. You have MG1, MG2, and then we have MG3 in the back. Just a giant motor connected to a differential. They actually call it a rear transaxle. That's the official term for it. However, it adds so much more than that, because now you have one more motor that can generate, that can charge the battery, that can drive. So now the car feels peppier and your regenerative braking works better. But the other thing is, there is no transfer case. There is no prop shaft. There is nothing connecting the front to the rear, because it's just the rear motor that drives. However, in Hyundai land, because we have that beautiful 6-speed transmission, things are ancient. And it is quite a surprise when you see it. You have a transfer case, you have a prop shaft that goes to a very old school differential and in the whole everything. Kind of unnecessary, because you could easily integrate a third motor, or in this case a second motor, to drive the rear, but it almost felt like, we'll just do with that. No, it doesn't matter, we don't need that. And that kind of puts more stuff you have in a car, the more stuff that can brake, and higher your cost of ownership. And plus, the way Toyota did it is just ingenious. It not only puts simple all-wheel drive in these cars, it actually contributes to the way it drives. So this one is obvious where it goes to. Let's talk about some of the maintenance requirements for these hybrids, or special maintenance. There is some additional maintenance items for these hybrids, but then there is also negative hybrid maintenance, stuff that you don't have to worry about with hybrids, which is pretty cool. Let's talk about some of them for the Toyota side. In Toyota side, you don't have an alternator. You don't have a starter. In the modern ones, you don't even have a drive belt to replace because there's no accessories, nothing. Electric water pump, and that's it. Electric compressor, no alternator, and that's really it. Of course, electric power steering. Some of the additional maintenance items on hybrids, on Toyota hybrids, you have an additional cooling system which uses exactly the same coolant as the engine, so there's nothing special there. It's just one more cooling system you got to replace when the interval is due. Additionally, you have a hybrid cooling fan filter that you need to clean. Very easy to clean, nothing really huge added as maintenance. But more negative maintenance, your brakes will last a very long time because most of the time you're using regenerative braking. You're not really using the hydraulic brakes. In addition to that, your AC system does use a special oil. So you do need a special machine to service the hybrids because of that electric compressor. You do need a non-conductive oil for the AC system. Otherwise, it's exactly the same as a gasoline car. In addition of one thing, the transmission on Toyota hybrids does not have clutches. So if you go overdue on the maintenance, there is not a point of no return where you could damage the transmission. You can service it at any time. It doesn't really matter. Very simple fluid. Doesn't really get burned and debris and whatnot. Kind of treat it as a differential when it comes to maintenance. On the Hyundai side of things, and this is where things get a little interesting. The brakes do last a very long time here. We have regenerative braking, which is great. But we do have additional maintenance items. Yes, we do have the separate cooling system for the hybrid system, which is fine, just like here. However, the additional hybrid system uses a different coolant than the engine. It uses a non-conductive coolant. Don't know why they need that. I mean, it's perfectly fine here that it's conductive, but they use a non-conductive coolant. So there's two cooling systems with two separate and completely different fluids in them. And then the drive belt. I mean, the drive belt usually is an important maintenance for most cars. You know, you lose it, you lose your alternator, water pump, whatnot. But here, it becomes essential. It kind of becomes like a timing belt. If you break that belt, it's the end. You can't start your engine, we're done, that's it. And then the overcomplicated tensioner that you have, which kind of starts to negate the purpose. I mean, you already have the hybrid battery and the cost, and we'll get to that in a bit, but now you have a very important belt and a very expensive tensioner that you have to continuously watch and maintain. Not really ideal, but that's okay, not the end of the world. And then the biggest elephant in the room, why the belt maintenance is important. The alternator, or the HSG, the hybrid starter generator. It is coolant cooled. So every time you have to replace that HSG, which is now a very vital component, you have to drain the cooling system. Of course, this alternator is under heavy load, so now you have coolant going to it to cool it, which now reminds me of which company does that? Yeah, that one. Not a great idea. So I can already see the maintenance costs on this one are going to be much higher than Toyota hybrids. Just plain and simple. So I'm guessing this one, you know where it's going to go. Let's talk about drivability and how these two drive in the real world. Small disclaimer, this is my personal car. This is a car that Hyundai gave me to do a review on my second channel. I will tell you the truth and not be biased here, because there are things I dislike about my car itself. I dislike the drone from the hybrid system. Every time you accelerate hard, I have a heavy foot, it just drones and drones and drones, and you hear the engine, and it can get annoying. But other than that, the transition between electric drive, hybrid, batteries charging or batteries driving, and the engine is glass smooth, especially in the fourth generation hybrid, and has been progressively getting better to a point you can't tell what's driving unless you look or you hear the engine is running or not. It is so smooth in the fourth generation hybrid, the transitions, it's incredible. It drives exactly like a non-hybrid model. But when you come to Hyundai, I love the 6-speed transmission because it is very smooth. It feels normal, it shifts, the engine doesn't drone, even though it's a little bit on the underpowered side, the engine is very small, but still, you have a proper transmission, it's shifting, it's going through gears, business as usual. But then there is an enormous elephant in the room. I feel like this hybrid system is kind of in its beta stage because things are extremely slow. You accelerate, you're driving on EV mode. All of a sudden, the engine wants to kick on because you're demanding more acceleration. There is a literal pause where everything kind of disengages, the engine starts, everything re-engages, and now we're going. It gets super annoying, especially when you're trying to merge into traffic real quick and you press the gas. There's literally a second or two of nothing, then it starts going. That can quickly negate the nice thing about the 6-speed transmission. And then the other thing is, the brakes on hybrids have always been clunky. Is a better word for it, is they're clunky. Because you're actually not using, there's no mechanical connection between the brakes when the system is on. Because of the regenerative braking, there is a simulator that simulates how hard you're pressing the brake pedal in Toyota hybrids. And it kind of mimics that via hydraulic pressure. Very complicated system, we're not going to get too much into it, but there's always like a weird feeling with the brakes. In Toyota hybrids, their initial ones, the first generation Prius, second generation Prius, it was so obvious. You press the brakes, it's just like there's a delay, and then you let go, there's a small delay. But in the third and fourth generation hybrid, fourth generation being this one, you can't tell. They're exactly the same. I get so many questions. How do you tell when you're using regen or hydraulic brakes? Things are extremely smooth here. But in the Hyundai, you literally let go of the brake pedal when you're stopped. There is a literal almost a second delay until the car actually starts going and the brakes disengage. Things are extremely slow in the Hyundai hybrid system. If you went from a Toyota hybrid system, fourth generation, to a Hyundai, you will immediately notice how slow the transitions are and how clunky and not smooth they are. Once the engine is running though and you're rolling, it's beautiful because you don't have the drone from the CVT. So this is where we're kind of in a tie, but honestly, most people don't complain about the CVT except if you have a heavy foot. So this one, sorry Hyundai, is gonna go too. Let's talk about another elephant in the room with hybrids, all hybrids, the hybrid battery. Now, Toyota's track record of hybrid batteries started very rocky and then progressively got better to a point where they even extended the warranty on their batteries. They're not worried about it. Hybrids batteries have gotten very good and they have a long track record behind them of how they improved progressively. Hyundais, on the other hand, not so much. I mean, they're just starting to become a little bit mainstream. They're just starting to really lay into the hybrid technology. They don't have the track record. They could be great batteries, but we don't know that. So this becomes kind of the elephant in the room. And the other thing is, I noticed a trend. Comparing hybrid battery prices, the older you go on Toyota, the cheaper they are. We're talking brand new from the dealership. But in Hyundai, for some reason, the older you go, I mean, it gets to a point where they're ridiculous for smaller cars. They're extremely expensive. Don't know why, but the average cost of a new battery today is $3,000 for the part, MSRP, brand new battery from the dealership. Same thing with modern Hyundais the last 5 years or so. But if we start going 7, 8, 9 years to the kind of the beginnings of when they started experimenting with hybrids, they're extremely expensive. So I see buying an older Hyundai hybrid is not as a good idea as buying kind of an older or middle-aged Toyota hybrid, simply because of the cost of that battery. What about the plug-in options from these two companies? Now, there is no Camry plug-in hybrid, so we're going to briefly talk about the RAV4 Prime, which should be extremely comparable to this one, which, by the way, this is a plug-in model. See, the thing about plug-ins is things go to the next level with a hybrid. Much bigger battery, much bigger challenges, longer range, but Hyundai went the simple route. the experiment route. See, Toyota plug-in hybrids, they're completely different models, completely different. There's so much difference between them, it almost as they're not the same car. RAV4 Prime, RAV4 Hybrid, that's the example. The RAV4 Prime has a very long range. The car is extremely fast for what it is. It's just a RAV4, it's not meant to be fast, but it's extremely fast, and it is more usable in colder climate. Not as usable as a regular hybrid, because at some point the engine will just be forced on because it's too cold. And the reason for that is it has a heat pump system specifically designed to give you better performance for colder climate. It's basically heater running without the engine running. But in Hyundai, they totally skipped over that. They didn't see it necessary in their experiment because the plug-in model is exactly the same as the hybrid model, it just has a bigger battery. So if you live in cold climate, the plug-in model, completely useless. If you are expecting it to be a lot faster, just like the RAV4 Prime with almost 300 horsepower or whatnot, that's not the case. It's actually, if anything, it's slower because it's heavier, because it has that giant battery. Same transmission, same acceleration, if not lower. Everything is exactly the same. So it kind of makes the excitement of the plug-in model dwindle down. So if you're looking at plug-ins, without a doubt. So there you have it, folks. The truth is, this remains the king of hybrids. Toyota has a philosophy. They do not change things if they're not broken or they're required to change them. And this is exactly what works in their advantage in this hybrid system. When it first came out, it was an experiment, and it was a horrible one. First generation hybrid, as much as people love them, they were very clunky and they had a lot of shortfalls. This, however, in the fourth generation, works flawlessly. The Hyundai feels like that first experiment. Things are clunky, things are slow, and I cannot believe in 2022 that we have this slow drivetrains that transition slow, not slow driving, even though it's slow driving, but slow transitions, clunky transitions. You cannot take a drive in this car more than 10-15 minutes without noticing one of its hiccups. It feels like an incomplete project, just like the first generation hybrid did back in the late 90s. While I admire Hyundai's engineering and how they did not just copy the king like others have, they did their own thing. And I think with time, they might improve it and things get better. But as of today, 2022, that is not the case. Toyota remains the king of hybrids, very smooth, very efficient, beautifully driving and beautifully executed with a track record, super reliable. Here, there's too many question marks, and even if you get past them, it's just the way it drives. It's not ideal. Folks, I hope this video was helpful and informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some other videos. And until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.